Hey, what's good, everybody? Isaac back here with a brand spanking new episode of the Unorthodox Social Worker, where we do discuss all things social work from an unorthodox perspective. Um, it's been a month since I've posted this channel. We've gotten some decent traction, about maybe about 500 views and all. So the message is getting out. If you're new to this channel, we do talk about all things social work. Lately, I've been kind of focusing on homelessness. But if you are watching, please do me the quick 3-second favor. Do it right now. Hit that like button. Hit that notification bell. All right. And hit that subscribe. It really helps me get into the YouTube algorithm so that more people are able to kind of come across this kind of unique content. So, in this article, we are talking about a Supreme Court case called the City of Boise versus Martin. So I'm gonna go ahead read a little bit of this article so y'all can get a basic understanding of this court ruling. And this is from the Los Angeles Times. The title is Opinion: The Supreme Court Just Denied Cities the Right to Combat Homeless Encampments. Okay. On Monday, the Supreme Court announced it would not review City of Boise versus Martin, a 2018 ruling handed down by San Francisco-based Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. In Martin, the appeals court struck down prohibitions on sleeping and camping in public that the Idaho City had enacted to address homelessness. Boise's ordinances did not pass constitutional muster, according to the Ninth Circuit, because they inflicted, quote, cruel and unusual punishment on that city's homeless population. By allowing Martin to stand, the Supreme Court leaves officials powerless to stop the expansion of homeless encampments. In many West Coast cities, the burgeoning number of tents have left the sidewalks in some neighborhoods awash in trash, human waste, and used needles, and have led to outbreaks of infectious disease such as hepatitis A, C, and rodent infestations. Okay, but as notorious as the homeless crisis of Los Angeles and San Francisco are, the consequences of the Martin ruling are most ominous for cities like Boise. Under the Ninth Circuit dubious reasoning, cities in the 9 western states covered by that court can no longer prohibit encampments unless a judge signs off on the adequacy of local homeless service systems. The ruling thereby strikes at the heart of the right to self-govern. Courts can now require cities to allow homeless encampments or take on burdensome cost of providing shelter. Officially, the Ninth Circuit only struck down laws on sleeping in public when no alternative is practically available to the homeless. You might think that from the language that which the city with adequate shelter beds can ban encampments, but not necessarily. Boise law explicitly forbade enforcement of its camping prohibitions if local shelters were full, and Boise shelters have never been full. So that's kind of interesting. The Ninth Circuit acknowledged the fact, but felt that local shelter providers' rules and regulations and rules and religious orientation made them inadequate to the needs of some local homeless populations. So that's interesting that I guess in Boise, these shelters are not accommodating to religious or maybe religious practices. Interesting. By the logic of Martin, any city that wants to prohibit encampments must first ask the courts not only to verify that it has enough shelter capacity for the homeless, but also to assess whether the local shelter programs are appropriate to the needs and desires of the local homeless population. So it goes on a little bit more, but I'll stop there. That's kind of a basic overview. So just again, this program is not a program, my bad. This court ruling is basically stating that now local law enforcement in any of these jurisdictions of these 9 states, I guess they're talking about, will be unable to clear or abate homeless encampments. You know, basically go up to a group of homeless people and kick them out of that area unless, first off, that there is enough shelter beds, so that there's enough available shelter beds for the amount of homeless people there, and is that adequate shelter. In this case, they mentioned something about that due to religious beliefs, the shelter was not accommodating. So that's interesting. I'd like to know more about what went down there. But I could imagine in similar situations I've seen in the past that you could probably prove a shelter is not adequate. Um, Maybe let's say you are a homeless individual and you have a pet dog, right? Now, at least out here, from what I've seen in all the counties, cities I've worked in, I don't ever think I've actually seen a shelter that will take a pet in. So I know that's a big complaint that a lot of individuals have about shelters is that you can't bring your pet. And that would probably be a reason that a shelter was not accommodating to a person, or at least in the opinion of this court. Maybe another example would be that sometimes you have homeless couples or like married individuals. Most shelters, unless you have kids, are going to put the man on like the male dorm and the female on the female dorm, thus kind of separating the couple. And they could probably argue, but because the fact that shelters cannot accommodate that, or even any kind of a reasonable accommodation, it could be because maybe the shelter could not be accommodating towards certain disabilities. So there's a myriad of reasons why you could come up with why a shelter is not adequate. But first off, like when I was talking about in the video about San Francisco, one of my main points of why there's so many homeless people is because they have X amount of homeless people, and then that's this big number, and then the amount of shelter beds is down here. So there's not enough shelter beds in San Francisco for the amount of homeless people. Okay? And then there has the other argument of which I was talking before, is that not only do you have to have enough shelter beds, but you have to have enough shelter beds that can accommodate a various array of situations, whether it be disability, religious belief, family structure, pet, whatever. So, when you're reading these news articles, it's very political. There's usually like even though I read an opinion piece and it was the Los Angeles Times, I do feel like the news, these articles kind of give you their opinion about it rather than the facts, and that's why I kind of like to discuss these articles so you guys can see on a deeper level. So do I think it's good? Do I think it's bad? I mean, I guess the negative of it is that, when they were talking about how if large groups of people are congregating, of course that's a nuisance to the non-homeless people, I guess. So I guess you could say that is a concern. But then also the greater concern is that you're grouping a large people around each other, like in unsanitary conditions with not like adequate places to put their garbage waste. You're going to have maybe diseases, infections. So I guess from a harm reduction standpoint, it kind of goes against harm reduction because you're allowing individuals to congregate in these places, and you have the higher risk of transferring diseases and things like that. So that is definitely a negative consequence of this ruling. I think that part of it, being more dangerous for the individuals living in that encampment, is a much more pressing need than being an inconvenience to the passerby, so to say. Okay, but what are the positives of it? Okay, these articles are not really stating what the positive of it is explicitly, but they keep saying there has to be adequate shelter beds. There has to be the amount of shelter beds. So what does that tell me? That tells me that local, city, county, state jurisdictions are going to have to providing. First off, they're going to have to build enough shelter beds, the same amount of shelter beds as there is homeless individuals in that city or county. And not only are the cities and counties going to have to start building more shelter beds, they're going to start having to build shelters that are more accommodating to all these various needs, and start actually providing adequate services. Because if monies keep getting thrown at the issues, the infrastructure is there, but the services aren't adequate, then the taxpayers are going to keep throwing money at it, not see any result, and it's going to kind of build this negative sentiment that the articles kind of present. So what's this going to do? This is going to force all local governments are going to start having to throw down and put money in to provide these shelter beds. So what does that mean? We're going to start seeing more shelters. We're going to start seeing a better quality of service, I believe, because law enforcement will have their hands tied behind their back as far as clearing the streets unless these local cities step in and start really addressing the problem. And I think what the Fed is saying with this, because for those of you who don't know, from what I've seen in the counties I've worked in, the vast majority of money, right, in homeless services, first off, comes from HUD. So HUD is a federal agency. That's when you're paying your federal taxes. It goes to HUD. HUD takes that money and then they disperse it to the county. They never disperse it to the city. So it's basically federal money coming from HUD into the counties across America, and that's where most of the homeless services money comes from. So I think really what the Fed is saying is that the federal government is paying the vast majority of these programs and funding these grants. All you cities like Oakland, San Francisco, even the state of California, the local jurisdictions are going to start having to throw down bread because HUD throws away probably, I would say million, at least tens, hundreds of millions, if not billions, in homeless services money. So I do think that the federal court saying that, look, local cities, states, y'all are going to have to start to throw down on this too. And it's always funny because the people are always addressing their city about homelessness. But the majority of the money that I've seen come in for homeless services goes from HUD to the counties. So please, again, if you want to figure out what they're doing with this money, in most cases, it's going through the county. So don't address your city, address your county. San Francisco is a little different because we are one city, one county. So a little bit different. So overall, yes, I do think this is positive, and the reason being because it's going to force local cities to vastly expand their homeless services infrastructure, and that is what is desperately needed at this time. And people keep complaining, why are we throwing so much money into this? Like, is it bad that we're throwing money into helping clear our streets, even for the pleasure of the people that complain they're spending too much taxes on it? Hopefully even it could clear the streets. This ruling will only allow the streets to be cleared if adequate shelter is built. So hopefully adequate shelter is built, and we really do start seeing the local cities, counties starting to throw down that bread, really break down the system and build a adequate and accommodating system. All right, y'all, that's my video. Please don't forget to like, subscribe. If you haven't done it, do it right now. Help out the channel. And we will see y'all next time. Peace.